Well, Dr. Donald Wallenfang, thanks for joining us on the podcast. You've been here recording with Johnette, Women of Grace, on Edith Stein. I heard that. I wanted to talk to you and just hear some reflections on Edith Stein. And a friend of mine was asking, why do we always know her by Edith Stein, not Teresa Benedicta of the Cross? Why do they do that?
I think because it's easier to say Edith Stein, and the other one's a little mouthful.
Yeah. But you teach at Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit, and one of the things you teach is spirituality. You're a third order Carmelite.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell us a little bit about Edith Stein's spirituality.
Sure. Edith Stein, what a tremendous woman, tremendous story. From her childhood all the way to the end when she died, I believe at age 51, on August 9th, 1942, in Auschwitz, concentration camp in a gas chamber there, because of her Jewish ethnicity, but also because of her Catholic identity, as she eventually became a Carmelite nun and was living in a monastery in Echt, Netherlands, to try to protect her from the Nazis. But the Dutch Catholic bishops spoke out against the Nazi deportation of Jewish people. And as a reprisal, the Nazis went after all Catholics of Jewish ethnicity. Right. So Edith and her sister Rosa were among them who were deported and then executed in Auschwitz. And so a lot of people are familiar with that magnitude of her life and this kind of dual martyrdom that went on. But less familiar are people with the whole of her life and what happened there. And she's an intense thinker, and I think that coincides with Carmelite spirituality, a real concentrated movement of contemplation and an exercise of the intellect to the highest degree, to the point of kenosis, the emptying of the intellect and memory and will, like St. John of the Cross talks about.
Kind of the nada, the nothing.
Right.
Yeah, to receive. And I actually got to go to, is it Roslav, where her birthplace, or where she grew up?
It used to be called Breslau, but
Breslau, yeah.
Roslav, yeah.
So, I went to the home there. They have a wonderful museum. They had a wonderful tour guide there, and it's hard. It seemed like her life is complicated, like her studies, and she was like really moved around quite a bit, right? Teaching, working in schools around Germany and Poland, I guess. But she had a lot of energy. It seemed like, didn't she?
Yeah, so much energy.
Yeah.
A lot like St. Therese, she wanted it all. She was all in. She thought toward the whole. She loved languages, studying language, history, especially German language and history, psychology, philosophy. And it took her all the way into theology eventually, even though she underwent an atheistic slumber age 13 to 21. It's really a remarkable part of her story, and I think something that is inspirational for us today when we're confronted by different doubts about believing in God or our Catholic faith, and we see this young girl become young woman, passionate about the truth, and she herself struggled, admittedly so, but it wasn't a lazy kind of agnosticism or tacit atheism. It was like she was looking for evidence to believe, and she finally found it.
Right. And she was working with and student of, right, some of the great, isn't like the founders of phenomenology, like Husserl?
Yeah.
And have you done much research into that? Or
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about what does that mean exactly?
For sure. I even published a little book called Phenomenology, A Basic Introduction in the Light of Jesus Christ. So it's trying to understand the method and its trajectory all the way into the field of theology and exploring divine revelation through this philosophical method. But yeah, as you mentioned, Edmund Husserl at the turn of the 20th century inaugurates this new philosophical method that aims to get back to the things themselves, get back to absolute and essential objectivity. Instead of being swept up into what was called psychologism at the time, or similar to what we call relativism today, where it's a subjectivism of all experience, he wanted to get at these universal meanings and essences, and this method was a way to do that. So in German he says, zu den Sachen selbst, to the things themselves. We have to get to the things themselves. So it was called a kind of similar to Thomism in that sense, where we really want to know the objective truth of reality. And phenomenology has a similar goal, but a different approach. I like to talk about, if we think about truth as a house, there's a front door and a back door. The front door is classical metaphysics, and it's absolutely necessary for Catholic philosophy. St. John Paul II talks about this in Fides et Ratio, his 1998 encyclical, Faith and Reason on Sound Catholic Philosophy. And he even mentions Edith Stein in that encyclical. But we need classical metaphysics, but to meet people, in a sense, where they're at by appealing to common lived experience as human beings, this is a backdoor approach to evangelization, and this is phenomenology. It's a descriptive method, whereas metaphysics is an explanatory method, deductive. But phenomenology is inductive. It starts with the lived experience and focuses in on the universal shared meanings of common lived experience. And then we have this unity where we can journey together, like Jesus with Cleopas and the unnamed disciple on the road to Emmaus.
Yeah. And it seemed like John Paul II embraced both those worlds so well, right? And like, what is the metaphysical part of it that they would bring into it that would help them? Because I'm thinking also of Hildebrand, because we did some classes with Alice von Hildebrand, and I just thought he was just wonderful in his explanations of the experience of the thing. He could just come at it from all these angles, these facets, and describe the experience of this thing. But so how do we blend the two of metaphysics, like you said the inductive and the, what was deductive,
metaphysics. Yeah, I think it's best to let each remain what it is, in its own peculiarity and distinction, and just let them be in dialogue with each other. And I recommend beginning with a phenomenological descriptive analysis of an experience and just describing all that we can about it. Phenomenology, its method works with 3 steps, I would say: bracket, receive, and describe. What's bracketed is called the natural attitude. And it's all these working assumptions we have about reality. A lot of biases, presuppositions, oftentimes ideologies. And this prevents us from thinking toward the whole and experiencing all of the givenness within lived experience. So we have to work to bracket that natural attitude, because the natural attitude signifies a reductionistic way of thinking in one way or another. So in order to expand the reductionism, we have to reduce it. It's this logic of the double negative. And we find this throughout Christianity. Death had to die so that there would be life. And so bracket the natural attitude comes first. It's very akin to Christian conversion, that Greek term metanoia, change of mind, change of heart. We have to undergo conversion through humility. And as St. John Paul II talks about phenomenology, it's an attitude of intellectual charity toward the world, toward the self, and above all toward God and the possibilities of God. So that's step 1, bracketing. And step 2 of phenomenology, to receive all that gives itself. That's the language of phenomenology. In German, Gegebenheit, givenness, or in French, donation. How everything that we experience is giving itself to us. When we think about our 5 senses and the unity of perception, we don't so much invent the world or create the world as simply receive it, all that gives itself. And phenomenology wants to receive everything by also, in a way, bracketing language as long as possible, and receiving things like a child, or like a person with certain kinds of disabilities too, where there's this incredible contemplative reception of the wonder of it all. And then third, we then have to turn to language and describe what we experience, communicate what we experience, and interact with each other's experiences through empathy and comparative analysis and all that. So phenomenology works in this inductive way, whereas metaphysics, for its part, begins with first principles, necessary conditions of possibility for there to be anything at all. So categories like form and matter, act and potency, cause and effect, substance and accidents, all these kinds of categories, where we have to reason to that uncaused cause. So the Thomistic 5 ways or proofs of knowing that God must exist through these various kinds of causality.
Right. And like thinking about Edith Stein, it almost, you could see like some of the feminine gift package and the male gift package together with this, right? You would think the woman would be very, in one sense, not bringing, I guess bracketing, not bringing in ideology, not bringing categories. She has a way, of just like say in the case of life or the human person, just to kind of pierce through that reality and say, well, this person has this need or whatever. And the guy might think of like more solutions or why he's this way and all this kind of stuff, And, but that is, so how did she move the ball forward in phenomenology, Edith Stein?
Yeah, it's really interesting. In her book, Essays on Woman, she talks about those kind of things, the differences between men and women. And like you were just saying, men tend to be more at home with abstraction and being task-oriented, and kind of focus the lens on what's the task at hand, let me get that done, and then the next thing. Whereas women are much more attentive to the whole, and they're very aware in a global way of the environment around them, especially about other people around them. And it's the maternal genius, how women mother so well, because they're so attentive to everything going on. And if, as a married man, oftentimes my wife is like, pay attention, don't you see what's happening here? Well, I'm thinking about something else, something going on with our kids or the situation. Megan will tell me, hey, pay attention to this. So Edith Stein, in her feminine genius, she recognized this very well and understood that this is so important for philosophy. She was one of the first women to get a doctorate in philosophy in Europe, and was boxed out from getting a professorship because she was a woman. That was really what she wanted to do when she got her doctorate in 1917 with her dissertation on the problem of empathy. But she was prohibited from entering the field because she was a woman. So instead she taught at this girls' school, like a high school, but also trained post-high school women to be teachers in Speyer, a Dominican girls' school, Saint Magdalena's. She taught there for 8 years, while she continued to do translation work, both of St. Thomas Aquinas, Questiones Disputate de Veritate, disputed questions on truth, and also some of John Henry Newman's letters and diary. So she's translating from English to German, from Latin to German. She's just this expert.
So she spoke English?
Yeah, to some degree. There's one letter, extant manuscript we have of her writing to someone in English.
So she converted to the faith before she was teaching these girls and stuff? Or?
She converts at age 30. So that was in 1921. She's baptized. And it was like right before that era of, then she's teaching in the girls' school, Catholic girls' school,
And I'm wondering, like, for like her essays on women, Did it come during that period? Because I wonder if that was maybe a blessing in disguise, that she could experience and see women in all these different ways and have all these different, because she moved around. I was surprised how much. So it seemed like she got a good taste of culture and differences and stuff.
Yeah, she did get many invitations to speak all around Germany and even in some other nearby countries. Because people were realizing she has some real insights here about contemporary women and the vocation and ethos of women. So it's a genuine, we could say, Catholic feminism, and that it's not ideological, but it's thinking toward the whole about the complementarity between woman and man and what's unique about each. She says, for instance, about the soul of woman, that the soul of woman ought to be expansive, quiet, self-forgetful, and self-emptying. And she recognizes that part of this feminine genius is to be attentive to the concrete, what's nearby in the flesh. And at the same time, she sees weaknesses in women and men. And men, of course, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we can we can be myopic in our approach to things, focus on just this thing and not be aware of the whole, not be aware of the emotional side of things. Where the feminine genius is very attuned here, very empathic, and but yet intuitive, and yet a weakness with femininity can be to be preoccupied with too much and too many things. And also in terms of emotionalism or things like that, and not letting the intellect work enough within life. And so she talks about that in these essays on women.
Well, it's interesting too, like seeing the whole. Do you think men can kind of see the whole in a big picture, maybe a plan? You know, we love to argue politics, or we argue even like with sports, why this team's winning. Why, you know, we come up with all these. You kind of see a big picture in that sense, or where the family's got to go, or maybe a sense of we got to move here. This is coming in the future, you know, whatever, or global domination. What does that take? But there is something. But there's a wholeness that women see, I guess, around the person and needs there, and kind of a, it's interesting, isn't it? It seems like it kind of contradicts a little bit.
And maybe again, it's more that men seem to be better in general at abstracting from the concrete, which there's something of the whole going on there, but it's more like the blueprint or something, whereas the women are concerned about what's in the room.
What would she say about like Ephesians 5 and male headship? What does that mean? What does it look like in the family?
Yeah, she does talk about this, and again in that book, Essays on Women, it's so good. I recommend it to everyone to try to read these. They're fairly legible essays, unlike some of her other works, Potency and Act, Finite and Eternal Being, in the Phenomenology and Metaphysics. It's very dense, but these essays were popular talks that she gave in all these different places, so they're compiled, and we have the English translation. But she does reference Ephesians 5, and she admits that when it comes to marriage, they're going back to the creation accounts of Genesis and talking about God fashioning woman from the side of man, that she would be a suitable helpmate, helper. And there's nothing of inequality in this, as John Paul II talks about in the Theology of the Body, the ancient Hebrew idiom of being made from the side, from the rib, connotes equality between the man and the woman. Yet there's a complementarity there. And so she does affirm what we might call the headship of the husband in the family, not to dominate, but to lead, to lead as a servant like Christ. And that's what St. Paul says in Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So she says at the same time, there's a paradox here because often because of the intuitiveness of woman, the husband needs to yield to her insights and trust her intuitions and say, okay,
Right.
let's do that.
Right.
So it's just both ends.
Yeah. And they both, like, the man and the woman both have their own, like, energy sources too. It's kind of funny. Like, I've seen that with women, like they can, they can have these strong emotional reactions. They can react quickly. And I'm like thinking, yeah, if like you're raising kids and the child's about to touch the hot stove, you got to get mobile quick, you got to react on the spot. And men sometimes can love, it's like men have this kind of energy. I don't know if it's like testosterone fueled or whatever, but maybe to take on challenges, to go for it, to want to do something big with your life. And other times, they can be kind of slothful, whatever. It's like they need the rest. But there's both an energy to both. But yeah, it's just expressed, I guess, differently, or it's focus. I guess maybe sometimes the focuses are different. But it's fun to see that, how God, I remember talking about the phenomenology. I remember one time we had these beautiful, like, little ground squirrels or chipmunks. They have a beautiful coat on them around here, and they run around with all this energy, and they, got all these hawks flying around, so they got good reason to be nervous, One of them got into my office one time, and I didn't know he was in there, and he was hidden in this paper tray, and I heard something, and I looked in this paper tray. It was dark. And I thought I saw these beady eyes looking back at me. But I remember, when I started to move closer, he started running for it. And I couldn't catch him, I was tearing up everything, trying to get it. And I remember it took me like a couple days to get him out of the office. And it just struck me, man, the energy, the vitality that this creature, like God put this in him so he could survive, he could build a nest, or she could build a nest, have a family, raise family, have, produce. It's like if you don't have that vitality, that energy, it was like, I just couldn't believe the amount of chaos this squirrel could do. But he plants that in all, I think, his creatures, and it's different in men and women, but it's wonderful to see that in family life and things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and even that word in English, energy, comes from the Greek energeia, and Aristotle uses this word in his metaphysics, and he says prior to potency is act, and act we translate energeia. Energeia is always prior to dunamis in the Greek, and so we think of our greatest energy as followers of Christ is the very energy, the very act of God, and especially the third person of the Trinity, God the Holy Spirit, at work within us, not just acting like a squirrel, perhaps out of instinctive design, which glorifies God in its own way, but in our human experience, oftentimes having to exercise this virtue of self-mastery in relation to the natural inclinations that well up in us in order to serve one another in love.
Yeah. And, she becomes a Carmelite, it's very austere order, contemplative. What was her, like, did she pursue intellectual work in the convent?
Yeah, she did. It's really funny. Her dowry in becoming a Carmelite was 6 boxes of books that she brought with her. So her superior knew she had these gifts and welcomed her exercising them in the monastery and encouraged her to write. And she wrote St. Edith wrote some beautiful things. Institute of Carmelite Studies Press has published upwards of 11 volumes of her collected works. One of them is called The Hidden Life, Many Spiritual Writings as a Carmelite. Very potent writings. Another one she works on and did not finish because of her premature death and murder was The Science of the Cross, which is a commentary on the work of St. John of the Cross. The word in German, Kreuz, is Wissenschaft. science of the cross, which is just a beautiful concept to think about, akin to what Carmelites saints call the science of love. And then she also worked on her magnum opus in the monastery called The Finite and Eternal Being. And it was a quest into the meaning of being through both phenomenology and metaphysics. But it gets very theological throughout. She's always a very philosophical thinker, but it's a philosophy that goes the distance into theology. And the difference, philosophy, this love of wisdom, is the exercise of the human intellect or reason to the furthest capacity based on the order of creation or nature. What we can know based on our best kind of empirical sciences and also logic, all the classic liberal arts, the grammar, the logic, the dialectic, the rhetoric, these kind of things. But theology depends on divine revelation as its source of data. And so when we combine reason and revelation, philosophy and theology, we're really thinking to the whole as God created us to think.
What are some of the things she said about faith and the cross? There's some things that strike you in spirituality and things.
Yeah, she doesn't hesitate to face the abyss, we could say, like all really serious philosophers. They look at this vast expanse of possibility on one hand and actuality on the other. And either way, it's saturating. So for thought already, there's a leaning in to the suffering of thought, we could say, and not being afraid of the big questions, not being afraid of solitude and silence, not being afraid to contemplate. And this is something that Jesus says to us over and over in the Gospels. Me phobu, I think is the Greek, but be not afraid. Don't have phobias. When it comes to thinking, when it comes to living, when it comes to loving, when it comes to risking your life for the truth and becoming a martyr. So she knew this, and all the little things which accumulated into the big things and her big ultimate testimony there at the end. And she could coordinate all this meaning that is lighting up in her life as she pursued what's called in German this Sinn zu Zusammenhang, this perfect coherence of meaning, which is tethered to the Logos, that is the eternal word of the Father, become flesh for our salvation. So all meanings relate to the meaning, who is the Word, who is the Logos, where we get the English word logic, Jesus the Christ. So she was convinced that he was the way, the truth, the life, even though it hurt her mother so bad that she converted to Catholicism. Frau Augusta Stein, her mother, who was a widow, her father died when she was about 2 years old.
And the mother ran the logging business,
Right.
So she had this witness of a strong woman in the business world, and her mother running this company and prospering it, I'd heard too.
Right,
Yeah,
there's some beautiful stories about her mother even procuring lumber for people living in poverty so that they could warm themselves.
Really?
And things like that. So going back to the feminine genius, seeing it as more than a business, but a call to come to the assistance of the needy other.
But they would correspond and everything?
Yeah.
They weren't like alienated.
Right. Yeah, they would definitely correspond. Edith would still go to synagogue with her mother, and she'd be praying the prayers out of the Catholic breviary in the Jewish synagogue, because they're the same, the same psalms.
Do you know when her mother passed, died, or roughly?
That's a good question. I don't know offhand what year it was, but I know that Edith didn't want to become a Carmelite right away after she was Catholic, because she didn't want the double blow of suffering to her mother. So I think she did, though, become a Carmelite before her mother's death, even. I'm pretty sure. There's a great movie, The Seventh Chamber, on the life of Edith Stein. Maya Morgenstern, who played
Mary.
Mary in
Yeah.
Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, plays Edith Stein in that movie. And I think it's well done. And I think, we see at the grill with her other family members, and maybe, as I recall, they were talking about her mother's death. But there was a lot of cross in her life, and so she took the religious name Teresa Benedicta, of the cross. And the Benedicta, because she was very influenced in the German city of Biron and the Benedictine community there, and she would go to liturgy there. She had a great Dominican influence, Benedictine influence, I'm sure in one way or another, Franciscan influence.
Well, the Benedictine was in Breslau?
Biron, it was called. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And then too, like, she had a deep sense of suffering for her people, right? She and her sister was in the Carmelites.
Yeah, like a third order member.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a famous quote where she's going to the gas chamber, right? Let's offer this for her people, right?
Yeah, she said, "Let us go for our people."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And is she like a real controversial figure for the Jews? When I was at the museum, I think, like, some of the family that had immigrated to America, I think they sent some of the furniture back for the museum. But I got the impression, like, they really didn't get this, in terms of, like, her canonization and everything like that. And but I'm just wondering, like, her person herself for the Jewish people or something. I know there was some drama around building a Carmelite monastery near Auschwitz or something.
Yeah, right, which I don't think ever happened.
Yeah.
Out of respect for the distinctiveness of the Jewish people and what they underwent, and the distinctiveness of the Jewish people to this day as a distinct religious tradition, and for Christianity, the roots always and forever will be Judaism. Jesus himself Jewish, the Blessed Mother Jewish, everyone. In the beginning of the church is Jewish. And so, she was a controversial figure as far as the Catholic Church claiming martyrdom in the name of Christ and his church. So that's why I would refer to it as a dual kind of martyrdom. It's a martyrdom in solidarity with her Jewish people. And at the same time, she was a Carmelite. It was the Dutch Catholic bishops who spoke out courageously against what the Nazis were doing, and that there was a retaliation is why she was deported, her and her sister Rosa, along with others from there.
And I heard someone explain it too, like the Christian view is that the cross redeems everything, that everything can be fruitful, and God can use all these tragedies. And the Jewish approach wasn't like, this is just flat out tragedy, complete loss, nothing good. So I heard somebody describe that was kind of the issue there. To build a Carmel there might show there's some Christian hope here, right? And this is a completely hopeless situation. But I don't know.
From a Christian point of view, it will make sense, and I think that's part of the ongoing dialectic, and it's a good between Judaism and Christianity, that we have a sense of brethren, we have a sense of brothers and sisters, of people who have faith in God. We can extend this to Muslims and anyone of faith and goodwill, as the teaching of the church talks about, even in the Catechism and some of the Vatican II documents, about the possibility of salvation for someone who, to no fault of their own, does not come to explicit confession of faith in Christ. And that though God has bound salvation to the sacraments, God himself is not bound by the sacraments. These passages But this dialectic between Judaism and Christianity, and we look at all the profitable work that's happened since the horror of the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were murdered, which is just unfathomable, and it happened not even that long ago, relatively speaking, historically. But a lot of really good work and growing sensitivity has happened since that time. And in a real sense, we cannot do theology the same as Catholics, as Christians, since the time of the Jewish Holocaust. Even for myself, I study also the work of a Jewish philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, another great phenomenologist from Lithuania who immigrated to France and helped bring phenomenology to France. And he has some wonderful books that talks all about the call of the other, responsibility for the other, and it's just profound work. John Paul II thought very highly of his work, Emmanuel Levinas. I published a book a couple years ago called Emmanuel Levinas and Variations on God with Us, since the name Emmanuel means God with us. And so in this work, in Jewish Christian dialogue and beyond, interreligious dialogue in general, I think it's a very important work in our time, and I believe St. Edith is a model of a dialogical thinker, not being afraid to encounter the other, interact with the other, raise questions, and ultimately try to seek the truth together.
You know, something that's coming to me is just too about, these great thinkers, that Germany has produced. I mean, think of the world of sciences, the Nobel Prize winning scientists and physicists that came out of Germany. But you have, just like from Western Europe in general, like a John Paul and a Benedict being formed in these great cultures and great academia and stuff. And it seemed like that treasure, is being lost. We're becoming kind of more technological, and and it's not. Is there some? It just seems like European culture, in some ways, like the Italians and everything, they have a sense. I wonder if they just seem more phenomenological. They have an appreciation for the things themselves. There's something about their cultures that preserve like these basic things, and they protect it with culture in some way. And granted, they all have their struggles and it's collapsing and all that. But just historically, there's just a richness there that we're very fast, technological, very kind of aggressive and, focused on doing. But, it's just sad to see this Western culture dying that produced such philosophy and great insights into things.
Yeah, I'm thinking the young history of the United States as a nation, and granted all the native peoples before the time of the colonization and everything else. But yeah, I think we're at a crisis in culture where we really need to work toward a kind of hermeneutics of retrieval and a recuperation of the essential and the elemental, so that what we do isn't shallow, flimsy, and subject to great transience and ephemerality. And we think of the great art and music, buildings, and it's like people really invested, really dug down deep, and were working to make, co-collaborate with God, a work of art. And I think it remains an inspiration for us today, and not doing what's most expedient, not reducing everything to commodities to be bought and sold. These are signs of the times of our postmodern era, and technocracy, as it's been called. But at the same time, I think the gospel of Jesus inspires us to new degrees of courage, to seek and to save what was lost.
It does seem like in some ways America can be good with the new evangelization, just like getting the word out there. I don't think we're good at building communities much. We're good at getting the word out there, and media and books and all this stuff just to crank it out. But when I got to go to the museum at her home in Breslau or Wrocław, that I remember somewhere in there reading the story of one of the testimonies, I guess at her canonization. I think it was like a German guard or something, when she was being transported on the boxcars to Auschwitz. She was like helping, I guess she was in a boxcar with women, and they said like some of these mothers were just despairing so severely they couldn't even care for their own children, their own child. And she was like, helping them, and helping to keep the child alive and do what was necessary to very practical things of like living in a boxcar for however long a time. And I was given witness to her sanctity, her heroic sanctity. And that just, I don't know, for some reason that just impressed me so much, is like kind of capturing that feminine genius, but just flat out sanctity too. I just thought, I never even thought of that aspect, like a mother despairing so much of her situation that she couldn't even care for her child. I can't even imagine that.
Right.
And she was like there standing like Mary for the cross with strength, to sustained by God.
Yeah, she had developed the habitus of self-forgetfulness.
Yeah.
And so she could be very aware of the other and the needs of the other, the little other, the needy other. Yeah, and that movie, The Seventh Chamber, there's those beautiful scenes on the boxcar, as you say, and getting out and with the children, handing the doll to the child and comforting the child as a spiritual mother to the children all the way to the end.
Yeah. And I remember going to Auschwitz, and they have like the train station, so to speak. They still have the brick arch. The train would come in, the loading platform. And then the remains of the gas chambers, they're all like ruins now. But it was like, and I remember I was sitting there, and I thought of like all the Hollywood movies about it and how they presented it and everything. And I literally thought they did a good job, like physically presenting what this looked like. But at the same time, in A Sister of Life, this was like during World Youth Day, I remember she put words to it. She said it was overwhelming and at the same time underwhelming, because there was something about it that was like, how could this be such a place of such great evil, but there's nothing there that like speaks of it in a dramatic way. It just seems all understated. And I thought that's very satanic. Right, he likes to stay understated. He doesn't like to make a big show. Right. It's like we're going in hard and heavy, and we're gonna take as much as we can, and be quiet about it.
Right. As Saint Teresa of Avila calls the devil, who acts like a noiseless file, just working away at souls.
And we'll just close with this. But in terms of her Carmelite spirituality and stuff, what most resonates with you as a third order Carmelite that really helped to form you or inspires you from Teresa, from St. Edith Stein?
A Latin phrase, I would say, veritas in se, how she sought truth in itself. And she gave up all she had for that pearl of great price, that treasure hidden in a field, that lost coin. She pursued it with a passion to the end, and that truth has a face and a name, Jesus Christ, that is worthy of endless contemplation. So for me, I'm on board. I'm following her to the master.
Well, one more question. You just sparked because truth is such a precious commodity today. What is your approach or take, or how, as a church, do we take on these transgender issues? Trying to be loving and caring and understanding, compassionate, but standing for truth and speaking out what's the right thing here and how should we promote it.
I think this is where both phenomenology and metaphysics are really necessary. And something I like to say is anthropology first, and that's part of the truth of our being. We have to affirm and validate the humanity of the other first and always. That's the first thing. That we don't want to put ourselves or anyone else in some box with labels. As the church says in some of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith past documents, that nobody is a homosexual, heterosexual, and a label, a letter. We're human beings, first of all. And according to the principle of totality, we're male or female. And there's a ontological stability to that, a metaphysical substance that makes one a male or female. That's given. And we don't get to decide. We receive our being from an elsewhere besides ourselves. And so we're called to be obedient to what has been given us. So in pastoral ministry then, we need that also phenomenological approach to be able to empathize with the other. What has the other's life been like that they may be experiencing sexual dysphoria? What's gone on? We need to hear their story. Janet Smith edited a really good book about same-sex attraction, for example. I think she writes a very nice introduction about that, and the language games that are involved in all of these ethical issues. So instead of labeling people according to some kind of sexual orientation or point of view about this, it's a matter of, does someone experience same-sex attraction, or does someone experience gender dysphoria and things? And if so, let's hear about this experience. What else has gone on in their life that they're experiencing what they are now? And so we think about Jesus in relation to each one of us. And as we read in Scripture, God did not send his Son in the world to condemn the world, but that the world would be saved through him. I think that's John 3:17. And that's the point. Jesus comes to save each one of us, and the victory has already been won. And the point is his salvation. The point is for someone to be washed in the church in the waters of baptism, and to be en route to a kingdom that's not here. As Jesus said to Pontius Pilate, my kingdom is not here. So it's a paradox that he also says, my kingdom is within you or among you, but it's also elsewhere. And I think as followers of Christ, with all these different issues, he's not calling us so much to curse the darkness, but to testify to the light and its salvation in him. That has an eschatological destiny about it.
As I get older, I appreciate that eschatological destiny. I mean, just something is like, I remember participating in Rachel Vineyard's retreats, and they would, for women, post-abortive healing for women and men, and they talk about like naming their child and everything. And I remember I didn't get the real significance, and it just only more recently it just struck me. It's like what you're saying there is that your child is in heaven in some way, that it's not all is lost. Your child is alive, in Christ. So how huge that is. It makes all the difference, not just for the hereafter, but right now. That this thing that I've done, it's not all lost. Everything is redeemed in Christ. Well, thank you, Doctor, for just talking with us. You're a serious thinker, so it's good to have you here.
My pleasure, Father Mark. A pure joy.